I'm RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. We'll be back. And I'll tell you, it's the 0 hour when it comes to saving our political system from money, and that's why we have our next guest on, Ryan Clayton. Ryan is I guess his title is Executive Director of Wolf PAC, which is a super PAC founded by my good friend and fellow troublemaker Cenk Uygur. And Cenk didn't like my name, so Wolfpack is such a cool name. I think I wanted to call it the Six Pack or the Flip Top Menthol Pack, or I don't know. But Wolfpack is a great name. It's a great organization, and it's dedicated to getting money out of politics. And I really am glad to have Ryan on talking about recent initiative to promote the subject, but just to talk about money in general. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Say hi to Cenk for me.
Definitely will.
Tell him I hope he's staying out of trouble.
We're pretty good at getting into trouble, but doing
I
good
know.
things
Well,
with
that's the mission statement nowadays, I think. Now, you came up in political advertising business, and you watch the growth of these independent groups and the way they're hijacking our political system so that you can't even get, whether it's gun legislation passed after Sandy Hook or climate control legislation, even as we pollute the economy, on and on. We could go on and on with this, but you see how it's affecting the trade talks and everything else. But specifically, I guess, we had Professor Lawrence Lessig on a couple weeks ago talking about his march across New Hampshire, and he's doing that as another way to try to publicize the cost of the corrupting influence of money in politics. Did you follow that? How's that going? Is that having an impact?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we went up there to New Hampshire to march with Larry Lessig. I went up on the anniversary of the passing away of Aaron Swartz, which is at the beginning of the march. And then Cenk went there pretty close to the end of the march, which was the anniversary of the birth of Granny D, who's a famous campaign finance reformer who actually walked across the country. And we went up there, walked sometimes 20 miles a day, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the snow, and just talked to local New Hampshire voters and got them all to promise that if a presidential candidate came up to them in a few years, that the first question they'd ask would be, what are you going to do about the corruption in Washington, D.C.? We've all got our issues, right? I care a lot about education and the environment and labor rights and things like that, but, we're not really going to get good public policy on those issues until we get free and fair elections once again in this country.
Well, is this the number one political issue facing us today? To quote my good friend Cenk, of course. How was that? Did I sound like him?
That was awesome.
That was awesome. So,
Yeah.
So of course, we know this is the top issue. We know this is corrupting every process, every form of change we want to make. So this is the issue, and I'm so glad you guys are talking about this. But are these guys, did you get voters in New Hampshire willing to say to you, for example, look, everybody talks about Dixville Notch and how New Hampshire sets the tone for the primaries. Democratic primary looks like a walk in the park for Hillary Clinton. But let me throw a curveball at you. Nobody I've talked to remembers this. Maybe you do, Ryan, because you follow this issue. But back in the desperation days when Hillary's campaign against Obama was tanking and all was lost, her last desperation play was, she said, I am going to make meaningful campaign reform and public financing of elections the cornerstone of my presidency. This was a last-minute bid for the progressive vote. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I don't remember her saying that. I remember her really pulling up in the polls in New Hampshire and doing a little better there. But I don't think any movement happens on the calendar of an election. I think there's a great movie out called The Square, which is about the revolution in Egypt and Tahrir Square, and he talks about how the streets are our ballot boxes, right? And I think somewhere in between elections and the streets, there's this new idea of citizenship and engaging with the people that are in elected office right now. And that's what we do at Wolfpack. We actually encourage citizens to get out there and contact their state legislators, because state legislators actually listen. They're not like the scumbags in Washington and all these congressmen and women who go on the television. They're actually, just local people down the street. They're teachers and they're firefighters and they're nurses and doctors and lawyers and small businessmen. They're just regular everyday people. So when you call them, they actually call you back and they'll listen. And, we've been talking to a lot of them all across the country about passing resolutions to call a convention and propose an amendment for free and fair elections. And what we found out was, looking back through the history, is that's actually how most amendments to the Constitution come about. You know, you start at the state level, you get a bunch of state legislators who are just regular everyday people, you know, all hot and bothered about amending the Constitution, and they start passing these calls, and eventually you get the amendment you want. Now, normally that gets proposed by Congress, but really the way it starts is it starts at the state level. With the 17th Amendment, they got within one or two states of calling for a convention where the states could just propose the amendment themselves, and Congress said, "Oh, okay, we'll just give you the amendment that you're calling for." So, you know, that's what we've been really focused on doing. Not necessarily in elections. Look, I'm a hardcore voter. I'm always going to vote, but that's not the end of your duty as a citizen. You know, what you really need to do is get engaged with, you know, actively contacting your politicians. The right wing's been doing it for years and years and years. You know, it's time for the left to catch up on that front and start contacting and actually being active citizens and being involved in the political process and making sure that we can get an amendment to the Constitution. Because if you look at most amendments, they're progressive stuff, you know, giving women the right to vote, ending slavery, making sure everybody can buy some booze and have a good time, you know, and pretty soon there's probably going to be an amendment to make sure everybody can smoke whatever the hell they want too.
Well, that's happening on the state level too, as you know.